forward. It's like, end of the world. It is.
I would go. I'm being indicated.
It's dangerous. This is joy. Really, really high tech.
Okay, can we get started? Thank you. What an obedient. That's better.
It always is.
So already we've had a change in our program. Associate Dean Jenny Watson, who was going to welcome you here, is unable to make it today because of health reasons. So I will do the welcome and the introduction both. First, welcome to those of you who have not been to Milwaukee before, or who have been, or to the Center for 21st Century Studies. It's a pleasure to have you here today, and the weather has turned miraculously spring-like. You may even see buds in the next couple of days, which would be fantastic. So whoever's responsible for that, we thank you a lot. I guess I'll start with some thanks, and we'll probably end the conference with those as well. First, I guess I wanted to thank Delia Hanna, who's our postdoc this year, Rebecca Sheldon, who's a former postdoc at the center, and Emily Clark, because the three of them and I first developed the concept of Anthropocene Feminism last summer and worked together to write up the call for papers, which you've all probably seen. It was really great fun doing that work. We're still not exactly sure what Anthropocene Feminism means. And I guarantee you that when I tell people that that's the name of our conference, that's pretty much the response that we get. Most people understand feminism. Some people understand Anthropocene, but very few have, except for, of course, most of you who are here, have any clue of what they mean together. And really, that's sort of the task that we set for the conference, was to try to think about what it would mean to put these two together, and I'll say a little more about that in just a bit, and then to really invite a bunch of people to think with us about that. So one of the things that we've added to this conference that we haven't had in the past couple of conferences we've done is a closing roundtable on Saturday. So the final session will be a roundtable discussion with plenary speakers in which we'll try to see what kinds of conclusions, if any, or what kinds of further research problems we may have come up with, or just try to do something like a wrap-up. I also want to thank Emily Clark for just making all of this happen. She's the deputy director of the center and really is the person pretty much in charge. I get to do some of the fun stuff, but she does all the real work and really makes things happen. So I really want to thank Emily for that. And she's had great support. Center for 21st Century Studies has a remarkable staff. Annette Hess, who many of you have been in communication with, John Blum, our associate editor, and also two wonderful project assistants, Matthew Bowman and Audrey Jacobs. Also, then finally, want to remind you that this afternoon, after Natalie Jeremijenko's talk, we will have a reception over at Sala's just across the street, so even if it's raining, the trip shouldn't be too bad. And we've got pretty heavy hors d'oeuvres there and a cast bar, so should be good for for all. And one of the policy decisions we've made is that the conference is all vegetarian and vegan. Not all vegan, but at least all vegetarian. So there should be plenty for everybody's taste. Okay. Thus ends the welcome. Now the introduction. The Anthropocene will not arrive in the world of the Game of Thrones. Coined in the 1980s by ecologist Eugene F. Stormer and popularized at the inception of the 21st century by Nobel Prize-winning atmospheric chemist Paul Gruisin, the concept of the Anthropocene postulates a new geological epoch defined by overwhelming human influence upon the Earth. More specifically, the Anthropocene would mark a new epoch for the Earth's lithosphere, its crust and upper mantle. Much of the initial evidence for this new lithospheric epoch came from geomorphology, particularly the recognition that large-scale impacts on the Earth's surface from human activities like mining, construction, and so forth had come to surpass the effects of non-human forces on the surface. Most scientists place the beginning of the Anthropocene at the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century. But some put it as far back as the beginning of agriculture, while others trace it to the mid-20th century with the splitting of the atom, or citing Rachel Carson with the invention and widespread use of chemical insecticides and pesticides. The concept of the Anthropocene has since been picked up and expanded by other scientists, chiefly but not exclusively geologists and planetary ecologists. More recently, the Anthropocene has caught the imagination of humanists, artists, and social scientists, for whom it's provided a powerful framework through which to account for and depict the impact of climate change in a variety of media forms and practices. In saying that the Anthropocene will not arrive in the world of the Game of Thrones, I'm not saying that the world of the Seven Kingdoms is not technologically advanced enough for humans to mark the latest geological, or the largest geological impact, but rather that the fundamental philosophical and scientific premises behind the idea of the Anthropocene are alien to the worldview of the peoples of the Seven Kingdoms of Westeros. First of all, the idea that humans have control over the non-human realm is an idea that has little purchase in this world. The line between humans and non-humans is tenuous at best, as humans are mothers to dragons, wolves and men intermingle as wargs, and other creatures, living and dead, put the lie to the uniqueness of the human. But perhaps even more alien to this fantasy world is the idea that climate could be changed or fundamentally altered by human agency. Seasons in the Game of Thrones last for years, not months, that is, in the world of Game of Thrones. As the HBO series enters its fourth season, the most powerful agent in this world clearly is the climate. Winter, we've been told in many different ways, is coming. Nor are humans the next most powerful agents in the world. That honor might go to the 3 young dragons who may reach maturity in season 4. In noting this, I don't only mean to make a point about the cosmology and metaphysics of the Game of Thrones, but rather to suggest that in postulating a non-anthropocentric world in which humans are not the dominant agential force, the Game of Thrones provides a way to think about a critique of the concept of the Anthropocene from a feminist standpoint. Just as feminists and queer theory provide a framework to critique the heteronormative patriarchal structures of sex and violence that animate much of the narrative of Game of Thrones. In many ways, then, the Anthropocene is a strikingly resonant reiteration of the problematic forcefully articulated in 1985 in the Manifesto for Cyborgs, in which Donna Haraway sees humans, non-humans, culture, and nature as inextricably entangled, and warns that the consequences of attempts to dominate human and non-human nature can at once be devastatingly successful and productively perverse. Indeed, the concept of the Anthropocene has largely been implicit in feminism, critical theory, and queer theory for decades, a genealogy that's largely ignored, or worse, erased, by the masculine authority of science, including the authority by which science now seeks to name our current era the Anthropocene. By the same token, while feminists have long argued that humans are dominating and destroying the earth, turning it into standing reserve, capital, or resource to devastating ends, it's also the case that this recent articulation of the Anthropocene, even as it affirms those arguments in many ways, would deprive feminism of some of the normative ground upon which such indictments are based. This tension has been anticipated in ecofeminism and feminist science studies. But now in the 21st century, the articulation of a post-natural condition in the form of a new geological age demands rigorous and sustained attention to global ahuman forces of ecological change, as well as to local spaces of vulnerability and resistance. In naming humans as the dominant influence on the planet, at least since industrialization, the Anthropocene recognizes that humans must now be understood as climatological or geological planetary forces that operate just as non-humans would, independent of human will, belief, or desires. But in addressing the climatological and ecological catastrophes consequent upon this new geological era, scientists and engineers would rely upon the same masculinist and human-centered solutions that have created the problems in the first place, whether through offsetting carbon emissions, developing new and cleaner energy sources, or most dramatically through the heroic agency of geoengineering. To this end, we created the concept of Anthropocene feminism to highlight the ways in which feminism and queer theory might offer alternatives to these approaches. Because feminist theory has long been concerned with the anthropocenic impact of humans, particularly men, on nature, we invited participants to explore what current interest in the Anthropocene might mean for feminism in its evolving histories, theories, and practices. More to the point, C21's conference on Anthropocene feminism was designed to highlight both why we need an Anthropocene feminism and why thinking the Anthropocene must come from feminism. Consequently, we began with two sets of questions. First, how has feminism anticipated the concept of the Anthropocene, and what might it yet have to offer? How can feminism help us to historicize, challenge, or refine the concept of the Anthropocene? What do new materialist feminism or ecofeminism, to name just two, add to or detract from current humanistic understandings of the Anthropocene? What does feminism have to say to the claim that humans now act as a geological force in ways that are independent of or indifferent to social, cultural, or political will or intent? Second, and equally important, is there or should there be an Anthropocene feminism? Put differently, does the claim that we've entered a new epoch in which humans are a major geological force on the planet call for a reconceptualization of feminism? Does feminism require a new formulation specific to the age of the Anthropocene, a new historical or period designation? How should feminism in an Anthropocenic age take up an altered relation to and increased attention to and concern for the non-human world? And throughout here, we debated back and forth on whether this conference should be Anthropocene feminism or Anthropocene feminisms. And I think in reading through some of these questions, I think my inclination is, I think I was probably arguing for in our discussions, is that feminisms is probably a more appropriate term. As important as it is for us to ask and answer these questions, and it's vitally important, as attested to by all of us presenting, attending, and participating in this conference over the next 3 days, I want to end my opening remarks by stressing the continued importance of the aesthetic as a form of feminist knowledge production. Inspired only partly by the powerful role that magic plays in the 7 kingdoms of Westeros, I want to conclude with an invocation of the magic of feminist poetry, a magic which has held me in its thrall for most of my adult life. So I hope you'll indulge me now in reading 2 poems, 2 presumably familiar poems, which have haunted me for decades and which have played some not insignificant part in my own Anthropocene feminist journey. Unlike the surface-based soil science of the Anthropocene, these are both watery poems, which present the depths of the ocean as both historical and mysterious, and make a case for poetry as knowledge, and knowledge as poetry. I won't, after reading them, gloss these poems as I might in a class, but rather leave them with you as an offering to the goddesses as well as the cyborgs of Anthropocene feminism. So the first poem is by Elizabeth Bishop, and it's At the Fish Houses. Although it's a cold evening, down by one of the fish houses, an old man sits netting, his net in the gloaming, almost invisible, a dark purple-brown, and his shuttle worn and polished. The air smells so strong of codfish it makes one's nose run and one's eyes water. The 5 fish houses have steeply peaked roofs and narrow-cleated gangplanks slant up to storerooms in the gables for the wheelbarrows to be pushed up and down on. All is silver. The heavy surface of the sea, swelling slowly as if considering spilling over, is opaque, but the silver of the benches, the lobster pots and masts, scattered among the wild, jagged rocks, is of an apparent translucence like the small old buildings with an emerald moss growing on their shoreward walls. The big fish tubs are completely lined with layers of beautiful herring scales, and the wheelbarrows are similarly plastered with creamy iridescent coats of mail, with small iridescent flies crawling on them. Up on the little slope behind the houses, set in the sparse, bright sprinkle of grass, is an ancient wooden capstan, cracked with 2 long bleached handles and some melancholy stains like dried blood where the ironwork has rusted. The old man accepts a lucky strike. He was a friend of my grandfather. We talk of the decline in the population and of codfish and herring while he waits for a herring boat to come in. There are sequins on his vest and on his thumb. He has scraped the scales, the principal beauty, from unnumbered fish with that black old knife, the blade of which is almost worn away. Down at the water's edge, at the place where they haul up the boats, up the long ramp descending into the water, thin silver tree trunks are laid horizontally across the gray stones, down and down at intervals of 4 or 5 feet. Cold, dark, deep, and absolutely clear. Element variable to no mortal, to fish and to seals. One seal particularly I've seen here evening after evening. He was curious about me. He was interested in music. Like me, a believer in total immersion, so I used to sing him Baptist hymns. I also sang A Mighty Fortress Is Our God. He stood up in the water and regarded me steadily, moving his head a little. Then he would disappear, then suddenly emerge almost in the same spot with a sort of shrug, as if it were against his better judgment. Cold, dark, deep, and absolutely clear. The clear gray icy water. Back behind us, the dignified tall firs begin. Bluish, associating with their shadows, a million Christmas trees stand waiting for Christmas. The water seems suspended above the rounded gray and blue-gray stones. I've seen it over and over. The same sea, the same slightly, indifferently swinging above the stones, icily free above the stones, and then the world. If you should dip your hand in, your wrist would ache immediately. Your bones would begin to ache, and your hand would burn as if the water were a transmutation of fire that feeds on stones and burns with a dark gray flame. If you tasted it, it would first taste bitter, then briny, then surely burn your tongue. It is like what we imagine knowledge to be. Dark, salt, clear, moving, utterly free. drawn from the cold, hard mouth of the world, derived from the rocky breasts forever, flowing and drawn, and since our knowledge is historical, flowing and flown. So, yeah, I thought about the fish, but I think at the fish house is just more powerful and appropriate and less cliched. This next one I hope is not cliched. It's Adrienne Rich diving into the wreck, but seems very much to speak to a number of the issues that we're going to be dealing with this weekend. First, having read the Book of Myths and loaded the camera and checked the edge of the knife blade, I put on the body armor of black rubber, the absurd flippers, the grave and awkward mask. I'm having to do this not like Cousteau with his assiduous team aboard the sun-flooded schooner, but here alone. There's a ladder. The ladder's always there, hanging innocently close to the side of the schooner. We know what it's for, we who have used it. Otherwise, it's a piece of maritime floss, some sundry equipment. I go down, rung after rung, and still the oxygen immerses me, the blue light, the clear atoms of our human air. I go down. My flippers cripple me. I crawl like an insect down the ladder, and there is no one to tell me when the ocean will begin. First, the air is blue, and then it is bluer, and then green, and then black. I'm blacking out, and yet my mask is powerful. It pumps my blood with power. The sea is another story. The sea is not a question of power. I have to learn alone to turn my body without force in the deep element. And now, it is easy to forget what I came for among so many who have always lived here, swaying their crenellated fans between the reefs, and besides, you breathe differently down here. I came to explore the wreck. The words are purposes. The words are maps. I came to see the damage that was done and the treasures that prevail. I stroked the beam of my lamp slowly along the flank of something more permanent than fish or weed, the thing I came for. The wreck and not the story of the wreck. The thing itself and not the myth. The drowned face always staring toward the sun, the evidence of damage worn by salt and the way into this threadbare beauty, the ribs of the disaster curving their assertion among the tentative haunters. This is the place, and I am here, the mermaid whose dark hair streams black, the merman in his armored body. We circle silently about the wreck, and we dive into the hold. I am she. I am he, whose drowned face sleeps with open eyes, whose breasts still bear the stress, whose silver, copper, vermeil cargo lies obscurely inside barrels, half-wedged and left to rot. We are the half-destroyed instruments that once held to a course, the water-eaten log, the fouled compass. We are, I am, you are, by cowardice or courage, the one who find our way back to the scene, carrying a knife, a camera, a book of myths in which our names do not appear. Thanks very much. Feels kind of cheesy to get applause for someone else's poem. It's now my pleasure to introduce or just call to the